This place is where many scientists believe humans created the first villages ever. But these massive carved stones were built about 12,000 years ago, and they stand upright just as the first day they were built.
It is fair to say that the only missing element in this pattern was the face. The human-faced pillar we encountered at Karahan Tepe fills this gap. October 2025. For 28 years, archaeologists have been arguing about the oldest temples on Earth. The argument was not about when they were built. The stone monuments at Gobekli Tepe, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and Karahan Tepe in southeastern Turkey were carved between roughly 9,400 and 8,000 years before the Common Era during the pre-pottery Neolithic A period. They are nearly 7,000 years older than the pyramids of Giza. They predate writing. They predate the wheel. They predate farming. The argument was about what the giant stone pillars at those sites actually were. At both sites, the central structures are dominated by T-shaped stone monoliths. Some of them stand 5 meters tall. They weigh tons. They were quarried from limestone bedrock by people who had no metal tools, and on the sides of many of them, the prehistoric builders carved arms, hands, belts, loincloths, necklaces, the features of clothed bodies, anatomically proportionate, etched into the stone. But none of them had a face. For nearly 3 decades, every researcher who has worked at these sites has been asking the same question. Are these pillars architectural supports that the builders decorated as a symbolic gesture? Or are they something else entirely? Are they portraits in stone? Are they ancestors? Are they gods? Are they specific human beings, made monumental, made eternal, by people who lived 11,000 years ago? In October of 2025, a Turkish archaeological team made the discovery that broke the argument open. This is what they found, who they believe it represents, and why a single carved face on a single stone pillar may have just rewritten the story of when humanity first started thinking about itself. You have to understand what Karahan Tepe is before you can understand why the face matters. The site sits on a windswept limestone plateau in the Tek Mountains of Sanliurfa province, in the far southeast of Turkey, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It was discovered in 1997 by an archaeologist named Bahattin Çelik from Harran University, who recognized the surface scatter of T-pillar fragments and reported the find. For more than 20 years after that, almost nothing happened. The site sat quietly under the dirt while its more famous sister site, Gobekli Tepe, 46 kilometers to the west, became one of the most consequential archaeological discoveries in modern history. Serious excavation at Karahan Tepe did not begin until 2019. The man who has led it from the start is Professor Necmi Karul of Istanbul University. What Karul and his team began pulling out of the ground almost immediately should not have existed. There were rooms cut directly into bedrock, some of them sunken, with carved stone benches lining the walls. There were T-shaped pillars, smaller than those at Gobekli Tepe, but architecturally identical. There was a single ritual chamber containing 11 monumental stone phalluses standing in a row. There was a vulture carved into a wall, its wings folded around its body. There was a snake-bodied figure emerging from rock, and there was a 2.3-meter-tall statue of a man, seated, with visible ribs and individually carved fingers that the team and the press began calling the corpse statue. All of this was made by people who, according to the previous scientific consensus, were not supposed to be capable of any of it. They were pre-pottery, they were pre-agricultural. They were hunter-gatherers who, by the standard model of human development, should still have been living seasonally in caves and rock shelters. Instead, they were living in permanent stone houses, building ritual centers that took organized labor and architectural planning, and they were sculpting the human body with a level of anatomical accuracy that would not be matched in the region for another 5,000 years. Stop and let that land. The people who built Karahan Tepe were doing this before farming, before pottery, before the wheel, before metalworking, before any of the technologies that we have spent 2 centuries assuming were prerequisites for civilization, and only 5% of the site has been excavated. For as long as researchers have been digging at Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, they have been looking at the T-shaped pillars and asking what those pillars were meant to be. The structural argument was simple. The T-shape is what you get when you need to widen the top of a vertical pillar to support a horizontal roof beam. It is functional architecture. The decorations on the sides in this view were just that. Decorations. Art. The symbolic argument was different. The carvings on the sides of the pillars were not arbitrary. They were arms, hanging down along the body, hands folded across the front, belts with hanging fabric or fur. The German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who excavated Gobekli Tepe from 1995 until his death in 2014, was one of the first to argue publicly that the T-pillars were anthropomorphic. The horizontal top, in his reading, was a stylized head. The vertical shaft was the body. The carvings were clothing. But the symbolic argument had one persistent problem. The carvings on the sides of the pillars showed the body. They never showed the face. And without a face, the structural argument always had room to push back. Anything could be projected onto a faceless slab of stone. The argument was unresolvable. Both interpretations were defensible. Neither was provable. And then, on a single day in October of 2025, the ground gave up the evidence. The dig season at Karahan Tepe runs through the late summer and autumn, when the heat begins to break. By early October of 2025, Professor Karul's 220-person team had been working through a complex of small, sunken domestic structures. These were not the monumental ritual enclosures the site is famous for. They were houses, 3 to 6 meters across, carved directly into the bedrock, walls coated in clay plaster, stone floors, hearths, grinding stones, storage spaces, the clearest picture yet recovered of how the people of Karahan Tepe actually lived. Inside one of these sunken houses, the team encountered 3 small T-shaped pillars arranged inside the room. The pillars likely served 2 purposes at once: structural, as roof supports, and symbolic. It was as the team was lifting one of these pillars to its original standing position, near the end of the dig season, that they saw it, a face, carved directly into the upper portion of the stone. The pillar is 135 centimeters tall, roughly waist-high, made of sand-colored limestone. The face is not naturalistic in the modern sense. It is stylized. Deep-set eye sockets, a broad, flat, block-shaped nose, a prominent brow ridge, sharply chiseled cheeks, an angular jawline. Every feature of a human face on the place where every previous T-pillar had been blank. Karul's statement to the international press when the find was announced did not mince words. This discovery, he said, could serve as one of the clearest pieces of evidence that T-shaped steles symbolize humans. The art newspaper called it a turning point. Archaeology magazine listed Karahan Tepe among the top 10 archaeological discoveries of 2025. The argument that had lasted 3 decades had its answer. The face does more than settle a 30-year debate about decoration versus symbolism. It changes the entire interpretive frame for what the people of Karahan Tepe and Gobekli Tepe were building. This discovery is particularly significant because it predates the famous Urfa man statue, also known as the Balaklagol statue, which at 10,300 years old was previously considered the world's oldest known human sculpture. If the T-pillars are anthropomorphic, then the great ritual enclosures at these sites are not abstract sacred geometry. They are populated. They are gatherings. Circles of stone humans, standing together in ritual space 11,000 years before the first written word. Some scholars, looking at the consistent symbolic vocabulary, now describe them as ancestor figures, the honored dead, made stone, brought into permanent presence at the center of the community. Professor Lee Clare, of the German Archaeological Institute, who has worked at Gobekli Tepe since 2013, has acknowledged how much remains unknowable. We do not have any written records, obviously, because it is prehistory. But the new finds, he says, are bringing the team almost close enough to touch the people who made them. Karul himself has framed the larger pattern. The growing number of human sculptures, he said, can be read as a direct outcome of settled life. As communities became more sedentary, people gradually distanced themselves from nature and placed the human figure and the human experience at the center of the universe. This pattern is emerging across the broader Tas Tepeler network of sites, including Seybert with its recently discovered human-animal reliefs and the now flooded Nevala Chori, which also featured T-shaped pillars before being submerged by dam construction. That sentence is the key. The face is not just a face, it is evidence of the moment in human history when our species began to look inward, to make itself the subject of its own art, to declare in stone that the human experience was worth memorializing. There is something else to sit with. Karahan Tepe was occupied for roughly 1,500 years, and then, around 8,000 years before the Common Era, the people who lived there did something almost no other ancient civilization has been documented doing. They did not abandon the site. They did not lose it to disaster. They deliberately filled it in, buried it, backfilled the structures with dirt and rubble, walked away from it. The same thing happened at Gobekli Tepe. Nobody knows why. The face came out of the ground because the people who made it chose, 11,000 years ago, to bury it. They sealed their own monumental art under the earth, as if they were giving it back, returning it to the place it had come from. And whatever they were trying to say by doing that, the answer is still down there, under the other 95% of the site. If this is the first video of mine you have watched, the rest of the channel is about exactly this: sites that were buried, by accident or on purpose, that are coming back into the light. Hit subscribe so you do not miss what is next. And tell me in the comments, who do you think the face represented? An ancestor? A god? A specific person who once lived at Karahan Tepe? I am reading every single comment. Thanks for watching.